Good morning, everybody. We are in the middle of the period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, known as the Aseret Shemei HaTshuva. Our calendar is set up very nicely for us so that we proclaim the new year. And then we have 10 days to get off on the right foot for that new year. Repent, to do some introspection, change our behavior to perhaps make for a better year in the year to come. There's a lot of literature about how to do tshuva, what is tshuva, what's the best form of tshuva. In the yeshivas, they read different sfarim, Musar sfarim, how to work on your personality, how to do certain things. But there are certain basics that I think we have to confront about the tshuva process. The best framework for it is if God plans everything for us in the future. So God knows what's going to happen. We have our destiny all plotted out for us. How can we change our destiny? How do we change what God has in mind for us? Bribe him by changing our behavior? Does that work? The best explanation that I saw is that if a person really does tshuva, and really everybody knows areas where they can improve in their observance, in their study, in their general Jewish life. Everybody knows what their individual needs might be. If a person does, and this is probably the whole basis of psychoanalysis as well, well before Freud. If you change your personality to behave differently, then you are essentially a different person. You're not the same as you were before you made those changes. So therefore, any decree that might have been made about you for the future doesn't apply anymore, because you are now not the same person that decree was originally ordained for. I think that makes, at least to me, a great deal of sense. The Rambam was a very unique scholar, one of my favorite people, because he was just so brilliant, not only in his output, but his outlook and the way he thought, the way he wrote. Brilliant people sometimes get into trouble. He got into a lot of trouble because he wrote his magnum opus, his Mishnah Torah, which literally means companion to the Torah, 14 volumes with no footnotes. So the rabbi said, how can you quote a halacha if you don't quote where it comes from in the Talmud? So there are two answers to that question. Number one, if you are a Talmud Chacham, then you'll know where in Shas this halacha comes from. And if you're not a Talmud Chacham, the reference won't make a difference. You just learn the halachas. And he says in the introductions to books are very, very, if you read the intro, it's available in English. You can Google the introduction to the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, his history of Torah Shabbat Peh, and at the very end, he says, you read this book, you won't need Talmud anymore. Pretty brash statement. Read my book, you won't need Talmud anymore. Which, halavai, everybody should know Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, and you wouldn't need, theoretically, Talmud, because he gives you all the, whatever you have to know, it's all there, in clean, precise Hebrew. Later on, he realized the problem of this, because the Jewish life in the Sephardic countries was at a much lower level than it was in the Ashkenazic countries, and people didn't have access to Talmudic study the way they did in Christian Europe. So the footnotes wouldn't have made a difference. But he was reading a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch for them, if you will, for Spanish Jews and Sephardic Jews in general, and it worked. And his authority was supreme. In many communities passed decrees that in any question of halacha between this person, always follow the Rambam. That's it. Even today, I think I mentioned once before, in Yemen, in Kaddish, they say, "V'chayecha nu'v'yomechu nu'v'chai barona v'rabana Moshe ben Maimon." They still say it today in their Kaddish. It's a great influence out of Sephardic Jewry. In any event, one part of his Mishnah Torah is Hilchos Tshuva. And his categorization, I don't have time to go into how he held Mishnah Torah. It's a worthwhile thing. Yale did the translation, an annotated edition of it in English. It's worthwhile. But Hilchos Tshuva is a gem. Hilchos Tshuva is divided into 10 chapters. So you could study one chapter each day of the series to make Tshuva. I don't know if that was his intention, but it works out that way. And no one else deals with the Hilchos Tshuva, the halachos of Tshuva, like the Rambam. And there are 10 chapters. The first chapter introduces the whole principle of what Tshuva is. The second chapter tells you how to do Tshuva. The third chapter explains how God judges people, the difference between a tzaddik and a rasha. The fourth chapter has 24 different behaviors that prevent a person from doing tshuva, which will be our focus today. The fifth and sixth chapters in the middle talk about free will, that you can choose to be a tzaddik or a rasha. That's the basis of tshuva. It also applies to character traits. The eighth and ninth chapters discuss the rewards for doing mitzvos in this world and in the next world. And the messianic times, what will happen during the messianic period. And the 10th chapter teaches that even though there are many rewards, you do it l'shma, you don't do it to get rewards. It talks about tshuva me'ahava, tshuva me'yira. Obviously, you should do things because you love Hashem. And what is ahavas Hashem? Okay, these are the 10 chapters, all meticulously arranged. The chapter that doesn't make sense in my mind is the fourth chapter. He's explaining how to do tshuva, the beauty, 24 things that prevent you from doing tshuva. It kind of doesn't fit. Why do you stick that in there? So a lot of the stuff, question always is, where did the Rambam get it from? Most of the time, you can find a source in Shas. Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, he has a commentary on the Rambam called Kesef Mishnah, and he footnotes the Rambam. Every halach the Rambam mentions tells you where you can find it in the Talmud. He's not always successful. There are many places where he says, I don't know where he got it from. Now, sometimes we find it in the tshuva of the Gaonim, or in a Talmud Yerushalmi, of which we don't have the entire Talmud of Yerushalmi, but I would say maybe 85% of the time we can find a source for what he says. The other 15%, it's either his own or a source that we don't have, which of course got him into a lot of trouble when his teachings were contrary to what the normal rabbinic teachings were. But why it was necessary for him to write 24 reasons that hold back to tshuva. And where is this found? And there's nothing in the Talmud about it. One of the commentaries traces it back to a comment of the Rif, who lived a century before him, Yitzhak Alfasi, who writes along those lines. He also didn't give a source for it, but that might be the only source that we have. But what are the things? Just a listing of them would be very instructive. What are the things that prevent us, people in general, from doing tshuva? Different things that prevent tshuva from taking place. Without going into detail on each one, it's a long list. Gossip, derogatory speech, hot-headedness. So far, we're all guilty of all of those things at different times. Having evil thoughts, befriending an evil person, being a guest at someone's table who doesn't have what to eat and filling yourself up. I guess you can call it pornography or looking at other people's private parts. It doesn't it gets in the way of tshuva. Partnering with the thief, saying, Ech teva ashur, I'll commit the sin, but I'll repent afterwards. I know I'm doing it wrong, but I'll say I'm sorry afterwards. Ech teva ashur. Celebrating the death of a friend, meaning I'm glad he's gone. The poresh minat tzibur, a very big one. If you don't get involved in your community, as a person, the values that are involved in the negative values can prevent you from doing tshuva. Ridiculing one's ancestors, ridiculing one's teachers, cursing the public, preventing others from doing a mitzvah, influencing somebody to go the wrong way, taking a deposit from a poor person, accepting a bribe for judgment purposes, not returning a lost object. If you find something, it's a mitzvah to pick it up and return it if you know the owner is. If you see if your child goes in the wrong direction and you don't protest, that prevents you from doing tshuva. Eating food of orphans and widows, not take. If you're giving out food at a disaster site, don't take something for yourself. That type of thing. Arguing against Talmidei Chachamim, suspecting the innocent of a crime, and hating criticism, not accepting criticism when you do something wrong, it's a biggie, and making fun of mitzvahs. So these 24 items prevent each one of them. I'm not going to go into detail on each 24, take a look at it in the Rambam, but each of these 24 things hold back tshuva. And he divided these 24 things into 5 categories, and he explained in a brilliant way, explained why each one holds back tshuva. And he said, all of the above and similar averos, even though they hold back a person doing tshuva, don't prevent it entirely. And if if a person repents of doing one of those 24 things, then you can be called a Baal Tshuva. A Baal Tshuva is a person who has the capacity to recognize his shortcomings in any of these areas or other areas as well, and overcomes it. If you overcome these obstacles, you are a Baal Teshuvah. You now see the correct path. You are returning. So, what does Tshuva mean? Tshuva means to return, lashuv. You have the path with a capital P, and people very often, it's human nature, sometimes depart from that path. Returning to the path with a capital P, that's tshuva, on whatever level you happen to be on. Without going into his organizational brilliance, why did he have to include these fairly obscure reasons in an otherwise very organized, meticulous order of halachos of doing tshuva? So one thing you can notice that the majority of these things are all related to things bein adam lechaveiro. Not so much between sinning against God, but human relations, how you treat your fellow man, how you behave in society, and being a part of society. And the one that doesn't fit in here, well, a couple of them may not fit in here. I mean, the issue of pornography, treating a person as an object, is very big on his list. And more than that, the whole part of not being part of the community. How can you be about tshuva if you don't work on behalf of the tzibur? If you're not doing anything to improve on any different level, communal Jewish life. That's listed as one of the things that could prevent a person from really being a Baal Tshuva. You can't only say me, me, me. You can't be totally egocentric. You have to be part of a community, and you have to work to improve that community in whatever way it might be. Whether it's raising tzedakah, giving tzedakah, being on a committee that works for a certain thing, helping the shul, whatever it might be. It could be the shul, it could be Meals on Wheels. There's a zillion different ways that a person can show that he's part of the greater Jewish community. Because again, in a philosophical way, the entire Jewish community is one organism. And if you're not part of an organism, then you're outside. And if you're outside, you can't be a part of the whole. And if you're not part of the whole, how can you prove who you are if you're not part of that entity? And to him, that stands out right away. Being part of it's the kahal, causing other people to sin, taking advantage of other people. The notion of echteh v'oshuv. People could sometimes say, I know it's wrong. I'll give tzedakah afterwards, or I'll do something to make up for it, but I got to do this, whatever this might be. It's like the description of that in the Gemara is tovel v'sheretz biyada. A person goes to the mikveh holding an insect in his hand. The source of his tumah is in his hand, and he's going to mikveh with that sheretz biyada. Can't do it. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. So the same thing is if you're an echteh v'oshuv, doesn't work either. You can't knowingly do something wrong and to say, it's just that expression. It's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. Sometimes you are at a crossroads of doing something that some people might say is wrong. I'll say I'm sorry afterwards. Promises you can't do that. That prevents true tshuva. Being a part of the community also allows you to prevent others from doing wrong things. And you have to repair your relationship not only with God and with your fellow man, but with your community as well. And to him, that's a very, very important thing. Because if you're part of the community, you help others do the right thing. Basically, we don't live on an island. And we need the help of other people, and they need our help. And we work as one entity. And this, I guess this is called midah keneged midah, measure for measure. If we improve the Jewish community, that helps us as well. If we don't, it may have a negative effect on us. So this is why he's listing some of these things as preventing tshuva. Each one of them, he talks about it in great detail. In terms of the community, there's an expression in English, you are judged by the friends that you keep. A person is judged by who he's friendly with. And hopefully a well-run Jewish community is a positive experience. Everybody who may believe different things or everybody's part of one organism. We're all working for the same greater good of whether it's a shul, whether it's a community, whether it's a Jewish community council, or whether it's part of Meals on Wheels, Jewish family service, your shul or sisterhood or whatever it might be. You're working for the betterment of the other people. And it's a lack of selfishness. You can't just say me, me, me. If you're only interested in yourself, you can't really do tshuva. And on another chapter, he goes into a whole other discussion about tshuva me'ahava being better than tshuva me'yira. Sure, you don't want to get punished, but that's not the reason for doing tshuva. You do tshuva because you have a relationship with God, or you want to have a relationship with God. That's the purpose. And he goes into some of his what I'm looking for. The digressions that he makes are very interesting. He talks about having the right teacher. And if you have the right teacher, you can accomplish a great deal. If you have the wrong teacher, or if you make fun or you demean your teacher, then you might be rejected in terms of tshuva process and also from your teacher. And he quotes the story of Gehazi. Gehazi was a servant of Elisha, a Navi, and Gehazi lied to Elisha about taking certain spoils of war. And therefore, his children, because he lied, because he took spoils of war that he wasn't supposed to take, he and his family were punished with leprosy. And by being punished with leprosy, you are automatically cut off from your community. You have to go chutz lamachana because it was a contagious disease and so forth. And in addition to that, Gehazi prevented other people, because of this episode, from learning from Elisha Hanavi. But the Gemara continues the story a little further. And if you remember the story about the 4 lepers, it's a Haftorah that we read, Sefer Malachim. There are 4 lepers who were outside the camp, but they were in between the Machaneh Israel and the Arameans who were besieging Israel, and they were hungry, they were looking for food, and they went to the camp of the Arameans, and they realized the Arameans were afraid of the Israeli army, and they ran away. So first they went in and ate, they were starving, and then they went back to the Machaneh Israel and told them the Arameans have left, you've won the war. They abandoned the siege. So because they reported this fairly promptly, and they saved the people themselves who were starving, because they went into the Aramean camp and ate, so they were allowed to return to the community. They did something good, and their good actions allowed them to return to the community. So it's possible, Rambam says, even a person like Gehazi and his family, who had one time distanced themselves, they were allowed to come back, and their transgressions were forgiven. That's the point of tshuva, that no matter who you are, how far you may have gone, the doors are always open. And it's important for us as a community to also understand that notion, as Rambam explains it. That not everybody's perfect. Human beings, by definition, have flaws. That's what makes you a human, not a robot. God could have created automatons. God could have created human beings. Everybody does every mitzvah properly and correctly. That's how they were programmed. That's not what Hashem wants. Hashem wants tshuva me'ahava, not tshuva me'yira. And this part of the Rambam's discussion in Hilchos Tshuva, but that chapter of things that prevent tshuva is very important, because in the next Perek, the first halacha of the next chapter, he says, it talks a great deal about the notion of free will. Because you can only do this if you have the capacity to do it. Because not everything is predetermined. Now, again, philosophers have been arguing from day one. How do you, if God knows everything in the future, how can man have total free will? That's a discussion that is never 100% realized or answered. They struggle with it. Some of their responses are interesting, but not for now. But the Rambam says, because you have free will, and because there are things that can prevent you from doing tshuva properly, you have the ability, you have the choice to choose the right path. And not even these 24 obstacles can overturn or overcome your free will to do what it is you really want to do. Yeah.
God himself has changed the future, like the sorrow and Abraham.
Well, I don't know if God changed the future. He could have, see, and this will get deep, very deep, the philosophy here. Was it built into the scheme of things in the beginning? Not that he changed. Philosopher questions get very, very heavy. And they wrestle with these questions. Did God change his mind? Can God change his mind? It's very hard for man to know God's intentions.
Shalom wanted to kill all the Jews and slaughter the nation from Moshe. Moshe changed his mind.
Well, did he change his mind? Was he just testing Moshe? It's very difficult within this philosophical formulation to say that God changes his mind. Philosophically, that's hard to defend. If God is perfect, he never makes mistakes. So how can he have changed his mind? He may have given Moshe various options. Moshe chose the option of asking God to change his mind, even though that may have been his purpose in the end. Yes, sir.
Well, he doesn't,
Yes,
just before the flood, doesn't Hashem say, Menachem, he regrets having formed man, and then when the flood, he made a mistake right there.
again, it's hard for me to agree completely. I understand what you're saying, and Mefarshim debate this very question. Did God really change his mind? Was that his plan originally? Who was he trying to test? These are difficult questions. I don't have black and white answers because these are not black and white issues. It's like the kid who's holding his father's hand and they're crossing the street. And the kid said, "Let's go." And the father says, "We can't cross the street now." The kid says, "Why not? I don't see any cars coming." He says, "You don't, because you're down there. I'm up here. I can see the car a block away speeding down. I see what you don't see." So the same thing in terms of how God deals with the future. God deals with things that he may have decided or may not have decided. It's hard for us to presume to know what was in God's mind. God has a long view. We don't have that. All the Rambam is trying to do is to understand how a person can best be his best self, which means shame. Basically, this is psychology way before psychology was invented. By changing who you are, you become a new person. You're a new person. You're not the same as you were yesterday. If you can change your behavior, if you can change your worldview, if you can do all those 24 things that the Rambam says prevent tshuva, and which comes right before free will, I think we can understand a little bit more about the tshuva process. And it's not only a solitary process, as I mentioned. The community is part of it. By being a part of the community, I think that the role of the community is very important in this process. Gives you a sense of meaning, gives you a sense of accomplishment in doing very, very positive things. The 24 things that prevent tshuva simply point out the Rambam's brilliance in organizing it, without necessarily having a Talmudic basis, but it's simple. It's simple once somebody says it. It may be common sense to understand that changing how you think leads to changing how you behave. If I take certain things seriously, and I believe this is the right way to do it, then your behavior will follow a certain path. If you say, this is nonsense, the rabbis made it all up, then that's going to lead you down a different path. Not everything that you do, you have to understand completely. That's why we spend our entire lives trying to study and understand. Everything, for every little thing that we do, from the moment we wake up in the morning until you shut your eyes at night, is all governed by the halakha. And every other human activity, in one way or another, is governed by the halakha. To the extent that we understand what to do, and then you go from what to do to why we do it, and you try to understand this with the help of the Rambam and the Rif and the other Svarim, that makes you into a better, I would say, more complete Jew. To do things by rote is not what the Rambam says you should do. But until you understand what it is Hashem wants of you, you got to behave a certain way. It's like if you're in the army. In the army, there's a chain of command. And even if you don't understand what the command is, and even if you don't understand that, and it makes no sense to you, you got to do it, or else you get court-martial. So we have court-martial in Judaism too. It's called kores, it's called chait, what do you want to call it? There are a lot of things. I used to have students very often would say to me, "This doesn't make sense." And I would say, "You're missing two words to me. I can understand it doesn't make sense to you. Let me explain it." It's very possible, even after I explain it, they may not understand it. Maybe my explanation is faulty or lacking. We can't put ourselves on the same level as God. And there are things that we may never understand. There are certain mitzvahs that are very difficult. There are certain things that, I think we mentioned once before, that you're not allowed to marry your brother's wife. It's an erva. Yet, you have the mitzvah of yibum. How does that work? I don't know. Yibum is a mitzvah, and as Shifra Farrell Hirsch points out, chalitza is also a mitzvah. So, in terms of that particular issue, but there are many things that we will never understand. That's why people spend it. You have great scholars who spend their entire day studying Torah. A person who is ignorant, who has not, how much is there to learn? You're a rabbi already. Don't you know it all? Because they don't understand that Torah is just, it never ends. It's like an ocean, the Yam HaTalmud. People used to, Europe, and even today in some cases, people would drive by or walk by the rabbi. They'd walk by the rabbi's house in the middle of the night. And if the light wasn't on in his study, and he wasn't sitting poring over the books, they'd say, what kind of rabbi is he? He doesn't study all the time.
Are you going to see Rachel tomorrow?
I don't know yet.
Because it's a lifetime of study. And
You
even
sure
then,
you wouldn't want me to be the
even
whole
then,
process?
you may not get to all the answers. But people who spend their entire lives studying
If you
What's
want.
that?
know more than those who don't spend their entire life studying. It's called the Yam HaTalmud, the sea. And if you don't know how to swim, unfortunately, sometimes you can drown. But that's why you need proper teachers, proper lifesavers, or lifeguards, if you will. So it's a process, and you have to be in it to win it, so to speak. Yes,
So you said there were, Rambam says there are 24 obstacles
to tshuva.
to tshuva. By that, do you mean you
Yes.
can't do tshuva unless you overcome all 24?
Well, not everybody has the same 24. I mean, you don't, not everybody has all of these 24 obstacles. But but these 24 in general, based on the Rif, are what he feels are the major impediments to doing tshuva.
So if you have the ability to do tshuva, you realize these are some of the things I'm doing wrong, and you try to correct 2 or 3 of them.
That's fine. So
You don't
two,
have the willpower yet to do
Good.
all of them.
so make a list, and if you do 2 a year, over the next 24 years, you'll be in good shape. Yeah, you can't do it all in one day, in 1 year. So yeah, all of these things, it's a process. Tshuva is you have 10 days. 10 days may not be enough, but it's a process. You have to, just like if you're in therapy, you have to work on yourself.
Okay, so you're not penalized if you can't do all of them.
All the halacha asks is that you do the best you can and you're working. That's all.
We're like a bunch of addicts, and the Torah is the antidote. As soon as you run into the Torah, it'll guide you in the right direction. But we all, similar to an addict, there's no matter what, you have a tendency to always revert back. Even though we said we're going to do tshuva, a lot of times we just revert back and do the same whole thing. So
It's a very interesting analysis.
The only way you can do it is you get into Torah as much as you can, and that will hopefully guide you.
It's a very good analogy. We're all addicts to something. If you're an alcoholic, you have to go cold turkey. And for the rest of your life, you can't take a sip. Same thing with the tshuva. If you have something, if you have a certain thing you have to overcome, whatever that thing might be, and you work on it, and later on you're tempted, that's one of the definitions. And elsewhere, Rambam talks about, the 5 steps to tshuva. And one of the things that he lists is that where you're presented with the same thing, or you're in the same position again, and you overcome your tendency to do it. And that means you've done your tshuva. Because you could promise not to do X, Y, or Z, and an opportunity comes up, you go back to your old habits again. And that's the temptation, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's sex, whatever it might be. people have certain weaknesses. And the whole process of tshuva is to try to train you to overcome those things. And so it's just training more than anything else. Again, it's very close to psychotherapy. Don't put yourself in a position where you might react a certain way. Overcome certain feelings, overcome certain habits. It's all what you're used to. There are certain people who were, I mean, in the Musar yeshivas, you know, one of the breakaways from traditional Lithuanian yeshivas were the Musar yeshivas, where they spent more time working on themselves as individuals than studying Talmud, which caused a lot of criticism. But nevertheless, that's they focused on being the best person they could possibly be. And sometimes you can over-focus and that's been the amount of time you should be studying Talmud. They were just focused on midos and personality refinement. And they were very, and I tell you, when I was in yeshiva, we had mashgiach of Yaakov HaKohen lesson. He wrote a number of books on Musar, and he was a product of the Novaradak yeshiva, of the Musar yeshiva. And I can tell you, the man earned his salary just walking back and forth in front of the yeshiva. Perfectly dressed, had a spot on his clothing, erect in bearing, two-pointed beard. And his job was to go around from class to class to teach Musar to the boys. Unfortunately, it was in Yiddish, and most of the guys didn't know what he was talking about, but just his presence was enough to give you a glimpse of what a Baal Musar looked like. And that's an important lesson by itself. He did write many svarim, but he was also a Talmud Chacham. But besides, a way a person presents himself is a lesson, is a model. I remember now, you know, 70 years later, what this guy was like.
Isn't the purpose of learning Torah?
Yes.
Is to be able to practice the right
Absolutely,
things.
correct.
So if you could be a great scholar and know X, Y, and Z, but if you don't practice.
100%. I'll get to your question in a minute. 100%. There are unfortunately some teachers who don't exemplify the proper model. They'll make fun of students. They'll say something that's inappropriate, think they're being funny. That's not the best role model. That's not the best role. Look, again, I think my generation was the last generation to benefit from the European Russia yeshiva. And they were very special. And I remember, you know, kids can be very mean and vicious sometimes. And I remember of Henach Fishman's and so, who the kids were misbehaving, and this is in college already. They were really misbehaving and being rude, and he didn't lose his cool. I just said, gedult, and I don't have patience for this kind of nonsense. Please be quiet so we can continue learning. He didn't get angry, he didn't yell, he didn't throw chalk at the kid. There were some rabbis who would open their mouth and rank out a kid who was misbehaving, or throw chalk at him or something. That's a lesson too, a lesson what not to do. And believe me, as a teacher, I can tell you, sometimes it's very challenging. Sometimes you have kids that you'd like to wring their necks, but you do that. But you have to do it. You have to do it in a nice way. You can't hurt anybody's feelings, you know. But all of these things are doable, but they're not always easy to do. No one said that the tshuva process is hard work. To work on yourself, to be a better person in any area that you know you're deficient, is hard work, because it means giving up something that you enjoy doing. If I like watching X hours of football on a Sunday, I love it. I get tremendous hanor from the game. But I'm falling behind in my daf yomi. I can spend those hours catching up. It's balance. So it's not always easy. You had a question, go ahead.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you said that, it's a whole process, tshuva. So the Aseret Yemei tshuva and, Mavi Rimet Hagzera and all this kind of stuff. So that's not a lot of time to try to, to even influence the Kadosh Baruch Hu that we're going to be better. And then it's not like he made a mistake, but that we're a different person. And so what he had planned for us is not really for us anymore because we're different. Like you're asking almost like for a chick-chock fix for something that Rambam's saying is going to take a long time.
Correct. 10 days on the one hand is a very short period of time, but it is to a certain extent a reprieve. It gives you an opportunity to begin the process. Maybe not complete it, but at least to begin the process. If one of the difficulties that contemporary Jews have is a linguistic one. We don't understand, most of us don't understand the slichos that we rush through every morning. If you would take the time to read the English translation of the slichos, it would be a different framework for your behavior for that day. It may not be 10 days may not be a lot of time, but it's not much different than a condemned convict waiting for the governor's call to pardon him. That's what we're doing during the 10 days of Aseret Shemei Tshuva. We're waiting for the governor's call, the last minute, to say, okay, you're pardoned. Because we see you're working, you're trying. The effort sometimes is more important than attaining the goal. It's very hard to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. But if we're working on it and we're trying to improve in certain areas that we define when we go through the various al-chaitz, all right, they don't apply to everybody. And you're supposed to add in those al-chaitz that you yourself did that aren't listed. You are encouraged to do that, to make it personal. As I said, it's a process, and the process may take more than 10 days. It may take more than a year. But as long as you are working on yourself to be the best possible halakhic and hashkafic Jew that you can be, that's all Hashem wants. Hashem understands that we are, by definition, human beings are weak. That defines a human being. You're not a robot. You're not perfect. But if you are willing to work on your shortcomings, to work on those defects, to be as perfect as you can be, then those 24 things that the Rambam enumerates will kind of fall by the wayside because they're all included in your attempt at self-improvement. And that's all. God doesn't ask stuff of us that we can't do. The only thing that we can do is have the will to start doing it.
Wally,
The first step is the hardest. Yes, Nathan.
the man that was speaking to the students in Yiddish, did he not know their language?
No. Many of the rabbis from Europe did not speak English. If they did, they spoke it very poorly. That's just the reality.
No, I'm saying, did he not know the language of the students? That's what I'm asking.
No.
They didn't understand him, so.
He may have understood things, but he lived in a world of Yiddish and Hebrew. And I don't think I'm talking about Israeli Hebrew either. I mean, about textbook, rabbinic Hebrew. And that was a problem. Many of the Rabbanim who escaped the Shoah, who came to America, there was one rabbi in high school. There was a young boy at the time when he escaped the Shoah, and he didn't know English, but on the boat coming to America, he found an English translation of Chumash. And that's how he learned English. But his English was King James English, and it was totally off. But English was not the lingua franca in the yeshivos, certainly not in Poland, Lithuania, and all the countries, Germany, where people came from. It just wasn't. Yes.
I wanted to add something that fits in so beautifully with the beautiful points that you're making. I had a wonderful third grade teacher, I'll never forget. She said, students, no one is perfect. This is why God put erasers on pencils. I guess now we would say spell check, right? But I always.
That's right. It's exactly, I've heard that quote before. Nobody is perfect. That's why God put erasers on pencils. I don't know if kids know what pencils are anymore today, but yes, that's true. By definition, a human being is not perfect. So this constant working on ourselves is what we have to do all year long, not just during the Aseret Shmei Tshuva. So we hope in the schus of all of us working on ourselves, be the best that we can be, which is, we started that expression before somebody else did, not the army. We should all have a Gemar Chasima Tov.
Molly,
Thank
Yes,
what was the name of the rabbi you mentioned back in YU?
which one?
The one
Mashgiach
you
or
said-
something?
Yeah,
Rav Yaakov HaKohen Lesson.
I don't remember.
Yaakov Lesson.
Too many years to test my memory.
He was there for many, many years. Yes.
Yesterday, we were learning with Rabbi Yunin. I said, you know, when I was a kid, I did something wrong, right? And really, my parents were very upset. Take whatever it is. And then I say, I'm sorry. And then a month later, again, and I say, I'm sorry again. And then another month later, after that, I do the same exact thing again. And I'm saying, at what point do you say, it's enough? You know, so you're sorry, but you're not really sorry. So his answer was a very good answer. He said, but Hashem can really see.
Not the rebound, it's terrible, that's right, it's terrible.
If you're really sincere, your parents can't.
Right.
Right? And he said, by the way, nobody says, I don't think that he was such a good kid when he was growing up. So, but anyway, he said,
when you said you were sorry, did you mean it? At that moment, you know,
I said, if you really mean it.
Yeah.
Well, now you know Julie's the only
this
person.
is the whole
who
principle.
had
Echta
a wish,
va'oshu.
because nobody.
You can't say, I'm sorry, and I won't do it again, but you know full well that you very well might do it again.
So, I don't know. I don't know what. it
Okay,
was, but,
Adkan.
It was quite bad. It's terrible. Lori, you know, Lori didn't know what to do, and you know, it was really.
Have a great day,
She
Wally.
had the Benadryl in the house.
Thank you,
So
Wally.
it's a very good point that you're making. You know, that there is a minhag that during the Aseret Shmei Tshuva to have Chol Yisrael to do all. So and Pas Yisrael also. So somebody said it, and it's a very brilliant observation. It's not that you should just be careful how you behave between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. You have to be careful how you behave between Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. Is it the question, by having Pas Yisrael and Chol Yisrael, is that a form of bribery? You know,
I mean, you know full well
Yeah.
you're not gonna continue.
I don't think that's the way to go. Personally, I think if a person's going to change it and you want to adopt the minhag of Chol Yisrael, then do it all year long. If that's what you want to do. Want to have Pas Yisrael, do it all year long. And you know, who are you playing games with? So,
I would put a bench. It's a bench. Nobody wants-
okay.